Hi everyone, my name's Michael. I'm an auditor. I'm very interested in the US election, even though I'm Australian, and there's been all these claims by Trump that fraud's going on, and a lot of Trump supporters are backing it up. I took a look at the numbers, and I want to go through it all. In summary, however, no, I don't think so. I don't see any evidence of it. I don't see that there are more people voting than there are people in the electorate, or I don't see that there's like too big a spike in Americans voting. If there really is, like, if the numbers are inflated by fraudulent votes, it's nationwide, except for Alaska. Every other country, every state seems to have inflated numbers, and they seem to be reasonably inflated. Yes, I get the idea that there were spikes in Wisconsin and I think Michigan, which looked bad at the end, which sort of like robbed Trump of a victory. But I'm seeing them the whole way through. It's not out of the realms of possibility that could happen. I do see some sort of things like software glitches, which I want looked into, and I do see some irregularities, like long stretches where no accounting is occurring, and funny movements in graphs. But we can look into those things before we can start saying there's fraud. One of the things that I did find was that there did seem to be a mismatch in votes for, say, Biden and votes for a Democratic senator, or votes for Trump and votes for a Republican senator. I might see it with Trump because some people just wouldn't want to vote for him because of his divisive nature. But if you were going to vote for Biden, why wouldn't you vote for the Democratic senator? Those things too seem to exist in Louisiana and Nebraska. It does seem plausible from the statistics that the Democrats get the benefit of the mail-in vote, and that the mail-in vote comes late and legally late in a lot of states. And so you see that sort of Pennsylvania curve up towards the end. And I see that in quite a few graphs, including one for Trump. So it does seem a reasonable explanation. I'm not seeing anything that would support the notion that there were more votes coming in than ballots that went out, that somehow there were more ballots received than were sent out in the first place. That's patently not true as far as I can tell. And I take a quick look at the controls, and the controls seem fine. Like, if you wanted to commit the mass fraud that you would want to commit to try and swing an election, I mean, you'd have to be able to like hack the system and have the auditors that look at the system in your pocket and everything. I just don't think it can happen. So no, I don't think there's been fraud in the US election. But anyway, all my reasoning and numbers follow, and I'm going to try and make all my information public so people can have a look at it, and I'll follow up again in a month. Now, from the beginning, I'm not talking about fraud. Fraud requires some sort of notion of intent, and I can't work that out. But I can find out maybe errors, or at least places where errors might be. So whenever I would approach a job, I would always want to look at the key risk areas. You don't audit everything, you audit where the risk is. And I mean, this whole thing's soaking in risk, because whoever wins this gets to launch nuclear weapons and create war or peace in the Middle East and everything else. Every powerful person in the world wants to influence this. But there are some pretty good controls over this. Firstly, everyone in America and everywhere else in the world is very concerned about democratic power and about who has the presidency in America. So there's a lot of oversight. Secondly, there's huge amounts of institutional power oversighting these things. I believe there's different sorts of ballots in every state. There's CCTV in all the counting rooms. There's observers from both sides. There's a lot of controls in place. I want to go through some of the better controls that I've heard in just a minute. But there are controls that mitigate a lot of that risk. Now, if you're turning up to vote in person, one of the big controls in place there is how many times a day can you really do that. If you get a chance 3 or 4 or 5 times in a day, going to different little electoral booths around your city, trying to get away with that thing, you're not going to influence anything. No one would do that, because there's 5 years in prison and $10,000 fine for committing electoral fraud in America. So that's a certain control. But with what everyone's talking about is with the mail-ins, that you could probably get your hand on a big box of 10,000 ballots if you were really sneaky enough, and then just have a long, horrible weekend of ticking Biden, or Trump. And that's what everyone's thinking that might be happening here. But there's some controls around that. In all but 10 states, and I'll go through those 10 states because there's a lot of risk there in my opinion, there's a system in place where you have to pick up the phone or go on the internet and call the electoral office and say, I would like a mail-out ballot. Please send one to me. You then have to identify yourself, give your address, you receive something in the mail, and what you receive is a ballot and an envelope, and the envelope's the important thing. I like this control, that you have to identify yourself, and you can only ever get one ballot sent to yourself. You might be able to say, like, my wife and myself, and put her on the phone and get 2, but that's not very many. You're not going to get a whole box of them sent to you. So that's a number one good control. The envelope that comes with you is uniquely identified, as I understand it. There's a barcode on the front. And so if someone steals it out of your letterbox, they really only steal one envelope. But if they manage to commit some sort of fraud and hack the mainframe and run a defrag and work out what everyone's barcodes are, and have some special printer at home that they bought from Russia for $100,000 and mass produce fraudulent envelopes and fraudulent ballots, even then, the first time that they lodge one of their fraudulent envelopes and the real envelope, wherever it is in America, gets lodged too, someone's going to work out that the same envelope got picked twice, and that's going to bring attention to the failing. So that's quite a good control. There's no way of them inventing a barcode of their own, because the barcode has to be preloaded into the system, and the system won't acknowledge a barcode that's not already scanned in. So I think there's actually pretty good controls around that. So once you get the envelope, you take the ballot out, fill it in pen, which is important, so you can't just mass produce these things on a printer. It has to be a human hand signing off on the thing. Put it in a privacy slip, put it back in the envelope, close the envelope, and the envelope has your name and address on the front, and then you sign with a pen your own signature. Your signature is already on record. You have to go in and identify yourself and sign something at the electoral office before you can get this ballot happening. And then when the person in the electoral office receives the ballot, they scan it, and your signature comes up, and they check your signature to the screen, and they ditch it, or at least they put it away for being rejected but kept, but rejected should the signature not match. So it does stop someone stealing it out of your envelope unless they know what your signature is anyway and can forge it. That's pretty good control. I don't know if I'd risk 5 years in prison for that, just for one vote. It doesn't really make any sense. So that all looks quite good to me. Then the envelope is kept, and you can't see how the person voted because the ballot's in a privacy slip, and then that another person on the day of election takes the ballot out of the privacy slip and then actually tabulates it and adds it to the record. Now, there are 10 states, and I try and remember them now, California, Hawaii, Washington, Colorado, Utah, DC, Vermont, and 3 others. Anyway, 3 others who have decided that there are going to be mandatory ballots set out to everyone that's registered to vote. So that means in California, 21 million ballots went out. That's almost the population of Australia where I am. All of them went out to the last known address. Now that seems a huge problem to me, because how many times have you moved into a house and you get in the other person's mail for ages? You would get other people's ballots. Now, okay, you still have to forge their signature, but if you're getting the mail from, I have their signature somehow, or at least if you bought and sold a house off them, perhaps you saw their signature on the offer for an acceptance at some point in time. It does seem somewhat problematic. And at the risk of giving away the ending here, there were 21 million ballots went out in California, only 9 million came back. That means there's 12 million sitting around on tables and desks and in bins and letterboxes, and there's going to be these 12 million ballots just floating around. So that seems a bit of a problem, especially when we get to Washington State. They sent out ballots to everyone, and it looks like hardly anyone sent them back, but we'll come to that in a second. I understand where they're going with that, giving everyone a ballot, giving everyone a chance to vote, making sure everyone gets a ballot. And it must be cheaper than having people ring up and say, I want to request one, but there's clearly millions and millions of ballots just floating around. I think the controls are there to stop them from being wrongly put to use, fraudulently put to use. In every state, the ballot is different on different paper. Obviously, it's got different writing on it because California had that proposition around whatever that weird, freaky thing that they were voting on. So the ballots are not always the same, so you just can't take one out of California and take it to Pennsylvania. But there are some issues there, from my point of view, at least anyway. The final thing that I want to say on the controls is that what happens when a person dies? It's tragic when a person dies, but do they get taken off the electoral system? Does the coroner or whoever it is that signifies that a person is indeed dead bother to tell the electoral system? Because if there's a whole bunch of deceased people on that electoral system, then you can ring up and say, hi, I'm Joe Blow, who died 3 weeks ago or something like that, and get a ballot on their behalf. Again, still have to forge a signature, but that sort of stuff can be done. And I've always wondered whether or not people are checking signatures really well. I hope they are in the electoral systems. They should be. So just doing some research, there have been some known failings that are out there. Trump's mentioning them at every chance he got. In Ohio, 50,000 voters received the wrong ballot in the post. In New York, it was 100,000. So there's 150,000 problems straight away. That would be enough to account for the change in votes for Wisconsin, Michigan, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Nevada, Arizona. Those ones were all really tight. However, as soon as one of those 50,000 ballots gets received by a citizen who thinks, I didn't ask for this isn't for me, this is wrong, ring up the electoral office and say, what's going on here? All 50,000 votes get cancelled. The software has the ability to go, all right, 750,000 to 800,000, those unique numbers, scratch them. That batch is gone. And even if the people send that ballot back, it won't be received, which is bad for the people who are voting. But those 50,000 people get contacted by mail, by phone, by email, and said, sorry, but we made a mistake. There's another ballot on the way. In Michigan, there was a typo on 400 when Mike Pence was left off the ballot. There was some mail ditched into a bin or something in Wisconsin. There were 9 discarded ballots found in Pennsylvania, 100 ballots dumped in New Jersey, and 2,100 ballots without the option to vote for Trump in California. But hopefully they were all corrected, and people found out about them. Like, obviously we don't know about the ones we don't know about, but I mean, citizens do seem pretty aware, especially after this election. The elections need to run well. They could call up and fix the problem when it happens. I should also comment that the postal system in America, whatever the US Post, scrutinizes this as well. They have their own auditors as well. I would like to see all the ballots pre-numbered, and then you could make sure there'll be no fraudulent ballots out there, but perhaps the envelope system takes care of that anyway. So to come now to some of the conspiracy theories going around and taking a look at them, this is a large spreadsheet that I made. I want to just add here before I'll come back that I didn't just go off journalist stats. I went straight to the source. I went to NBC and New York Times, and I took all the data straight from, I imagine, whatever the American electoral system is, and got the numbers raw. So I cut out the middleman. So it's all my own numbers. That means that I might have made some mistakes. No one's checked my work. I've checked it myself a couple of times. I hope I got it right. I probably missed a few things, but I have found errors. Either they're my errors or they're the data's errors, but you'll see them as they come up. There's some things in here that don't quite make sense to me. However, so all of these numbers you're looking at, or you're about to look at now, are all my own numbers. There's no middleman involved here. Let's take a look. One of the allegations is that there's just way too many people who have voted in 2020. Like there's like 101% of the population voted or something. That isn't the case. This is a graph that shows the ballots per VEP. That's voter eligible population. So over a certain age, I think is it 18 or 21 in America? Anyway, over 18, you can vote, but some of those people go to prison or have some sort of problem where they're not allowed to vote. So there's a voter eligible population. This is ballots received per VEP in 16 in blue and per VEP in 20. Keep in mind, 20 isn't finished counting yet, but I think we're 96% of the way there per my numbers. And except for, this is Alaska. In every state except for Alaska, there's more people that voted in 20 than in 16. There are varying, I'll take you through the numbers in a second, but there are varying degrees of changes. Hawaii is the big one. Look at that. Hawaii was only 43% versus 57%, but there was always an increase. And just looking at that, we'll look at the numbers soon, but it looks pretty consistent. So where are these problematic states? Pennsylvania. Oh, we'll come to the numbers in a second anyway. So here's the actual raw data. Hawaii had a 14% increase. Keep in mind that was one of the states that had the mandatory ballots set out. So the states in bold here are the ones that got all their registered voters got ballots sent out. These are the ones in bold here. So there's a few more down here. Colorado, California, DC was the one I forgot. So 4 of those states were below the average line and 6 were above it. So you'd expect to see more people vote when you got a ballot sent out. Hawaii was a big one. Now the states in yellow are these sort of battleground states, the states that we know that people try to swing away from Trump. They're all very high, which means that there were lots of votes in those states. So maybe it was because of fraud, because people really wanted to flip Texas and Arizona and Georgia and Michigan and North Carolina and Pennsylvania and the rest of it. Maybe they got an unduly high level of voting population contributing to the election because it's just that they had politicians swarming all over their state for a whole year. I mean, how many rallies did Trump do in Texas and Pennsylvania and North Carolina and Florida? A lot of money got spent down there. So it's not necessarily the case. All in all, there was a 5.61% increase between the 2 years. And, it looks, there's 51 states, 27, 24. Yeah, there's probably a few more above the line than are below the line, but it was only Alaska that went down. So by and large, every state increased their vote. I don't think it was unduly high. I certainly don't know that there was more votes cast than there was population. In fact, I know for a fact that it wasn't. However, one of the other allegations is that have been more mail ballots come in than went out. And that's this particular chart. So in this, blue is ballots sent out and red is ballots returned. I don't see any in which there are red lines above the blue lines. That would be a real problem if there was, but consistently across the board. There are states like Mississippi and Louisiana. We'll come to Louisiana because there's an issue there. But it's the states that I can't get any data for. Look at California's. California's was actually 21 million. I had to cut off there because it just kept going and going and going. Only 9 million came back. There's that 12 million that are still floating around out there. Jersey had a big problem. Washington down here, the state of Washington, only 240,000 came back of the 4.6 million. I'm open to the idea that that's going to be wrong. I'm sure of the numbers. I've doubled and tripled and quadruple checked that. But I imagine I'm going to have a look at this in a month, and I reckon those numbers are actually going to be wrong. Ohio had a lot come back. I mean, that pretty much everyone in Ohio that asked for one sent one in. It was only like a $200,000, 180,000, vote difference there. That's not very much at all. Perhaps you might find some fraudulent ballots in there showing that the return is too high, but I mean, I don't see any reason to call it right now. I don't see anything to go in there in versus out. The ballots out versus ballots in. So the next allegation was, one allegation was the sort of premise that a lot of the Democrats said was that just mail-ins favored the Democrats. That Biden was saying the whole time that make sure you use your mail-ins. Where are we? So the blue is Biden votes that were mail-ins, and the red is Trump votes that were mail-ins in each particular state. And for some reason, Wyoming, there were more mail-ins from Trump, and for some reason, Jersey, there were more mail-ins for Trump. I'm open to the idea that Jersey's going to be wrong at the end of all this, because Trump voters giving in more mail-ins doesn't make sense. And also, we had that huge discrepancy in the last graph. So I'm open to the idea that there's some missing Biden mail-ins not reported here, which will increase this blue line to up here. And if we go back to the last graph, it won't show such a discrepancy. But the big one is Pennsylvania. Look at that. 7% versus 27% for Biden. It's a huge discrepancy there. But Idaho too. I mean, that's just a Trump straight down the line. Perhaps people don't want to drive too far. Oh, look, Minnesota. There we go. That could be Trump in front of... Oh, it's tiny. So it does seem to hold up that Biden can expect to see more mail-ins. And as we know, in those key states of Pennsylvania, Georgia, North Carolina, Nevada, Arizona, the ones that were counted at the end, Michigan, Wisconsin, after all the walk-in people that just voted face-to-face were counted, then they started counting the mail-ins. Annoyingly for Trump supporters, the Biden graph just seemed to keep going up and up and up. Look at Hawaii. Hawaii's got to be wrong. We'll come to Hawaii in a second. In fact, we should do it right now. This is the... Okay, forgive me for cutting away then, but this website is just updated. Check out this. This is NBC News. Early voting in Hawaii. Mail-ins and early in-person ballots returned. 321,000. 100% of which are mail-ins. And party registration, only 1% for the GOP and 90% for Democrats. So that would make you think that, that's obviously wrong. It cannot be right. But this is the NBC. Now, if we go to New York Times, and this is Hawaii again. So Hawaii there, Hawaii here, New York Times. Absentee votes by candidates. Now, we've got 20,000 coming back from Trump and 7,800 coming back from Biden. That's very different to what's being reported here. Wonder if I hit refresh, what will happen here. Same thing. 321,000 returned. 28,000 returned. That seems to be wrong. 573 total reported, 365 to Trump. 365 to Trump. Lucy, you got some splaining to do. So this seems to be one of the... we're doing this really live and really early on in the piece. They haven't even finished counting yet. So I'm going to ignore Hawaii for the rest of this. But this is some of the problems I'm dealing with doing this so soon. You really need to leave some time to be able to look back on it all. But anyway, where was I with now? So we accept that absentees do seem to favour Biden. Now, one of the other things is that which there is some substance to, is that you would expect to see if everyone grabbed a ballot paper and voted for Trump, you'd also expect them to see them vote for their senator, their Republican senator, or vice versa. If they voted for Biden, you expect them to have a vote for a Democratic senator. And this is what this graph tries to show. You'd expect to see no lines at all. Where the lines go below the lines, that's when there's not enough votes for a senator. When the lines go above the lines, that's when there's too many votes for a senator. So look at Louisiana here. That's huge. And we'll come to the actual numbers here. Where's Louisiana? So Louisiana is row 22. There's 393 votes for the senator, but 855 votes for Biden. That means there's like 450,000 votes for Biden, which people didn't bother to mark the senator. That doesn't make any sense at all. So let's come here. Biden got 855,000, but Adrian Perkins only got 393. Why would people people must have been voting for Biden upstairs and Bill Cassidy downstairs. But that can't be right either, because Bill Cassidy and Trump got about the same number of votes. There was a whole 450,000 that didn't vote for Adrian Perkins here. If I was Adrian, I'd be asking for a recount. That seems ridiculous. These must be either a mistake or this must be Democratic ballots that had just no vote for the Senate on it whatsoever. Maybe that was the case. I mean, I Googled Adrian Perkins at the end of when I was looking at all this, and he doesn't seem to have done anything wrong. Sometimes like people wouldn't have voted him for some reason. I think he was a mayor of a place and seemed quite well liked, and he out fundraised Bill Cassidy from what I read. I don't understand that. I'm calling FUBAR on that, and I think that there's something gone wrong there, and I hope to see that fixed, or at least an explanation as to why that is. It's also the case here in Nebraska. If we bring up Nebraska, Joe Biden got 367 votes up there, but poor old Chris only got 222,000 down here. Chris should ask for a recount as well. But you can see with Ben and with Donald Trump up here, about the same. Let's just take a random... Ooh, that one didn't work. Take Georgia. 2.465 million for Joe, 2.366 for John. Yep, seems reasonable. Trump got 2.4 and 2.4 is almost exactly the same. So the other ones seem to work out. Louisiana seems wrong. Nebraska seems wrong. I'm going to be following up on that before this is all over. That doesn't seem right. So there does seem to be some substance that there are votes for presidents where there aren't votes for senators. And big discrepancies. There's more than that. You can see them. It's also here for Rhode Island and for West Virginia, and there's a few. Interestingly, there's some here that there's way more votes for the senator than there are for Donald Trump. So in a month's time, if this data is still available, I'm going to go and find out more about it. Now, to one of the ones that the very visual thing that everyone's sort of talking about is these curves. And this is hard to talk about. But this is really not a numbers game. This is just trying to look at patterns. And so all of these, every one of these graphs represents the votes counted over time in a particular state. I've tried to classify them into 3 classifications. One classification where there's a state that starts in front and stays in front. So that's this particular group of graphs here. I haven't got the names next to them, so you don't get misled, but I'll find them as I need them. You can see, ignore the first 10-15% in all these graphs because they don't make don't make much sense, because it's very easy to change something that only 10% is counted when you come across like a moderate-sized city. Try and just focus on the second half. But in all of these graphs, as you can see, one of the parties was in front and stayed in front for almost the whole time. There wasn't a crossover or there wasn't a big spike or anything like that. And so this is all pretty common sense stuff. And this is the vast majority. This is 31 out of the 51 states. I want to bring your attention, though, to, let's say, this particular guy here. So this is Alabama. Look at this. This is like every little step here is another electorate that got counted or another batch of counting coming through, and it's very up and down, you know, as you'd expect to see. Take a look at this guy. Yes, this is Alaska. So if we come to Alaska's actual map, you'll see there's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, however many. Yeah, there's a fair few districts there actually, isn't there? But as each one gets counted, see, that's what Alaska has. What's that? It's got to be like 30 districts there. But the graph 1, 2, 3, you can see they've clearly only counted 3. Like there's just one batch came in, another batch came in, and another batch came in again. The same thing I noticed happened with Maryland as well. There's only like three electorates, or whatever you would call them, electoral districts in Maryland, and you just see these flat lines. So I'd expect, you know, however many districts there are for Alaska, I would expect to see that many bumps, you know, going along. I'm not seeing that yet, so I don't trust that one, but I do trust things that look like this. Flatness shouldn't exist. Here's another one. What's this one? I think this is Maryland. Oh, actually, sorry, not Maryland, Delaware. I always got those two mixed up. There's only 3 electorates. Newcastle, where Wilmington is, Dover, and then Sussex. Oh, Newcastle, Kent, Sussex. How English? 1, 2, 3. So there's just 3 batches of counts taking place. Alright, so unless it's something like that, I don't trust flat lines. Flat lines tell me there's a lot more to be counted. And there are some places, namely Nevada and I think Arizona as well, where there's just huge big flat lines. And I don't trust in places, for example, like this, that really, between there and there, fully 20% of counting went on. I went bugger all percent of counting. I think a lot of counting probably happened there, but not there. Here's another one. I don't reckon that was just like 28, 29% of that state. there was no variance. There's just no counting went on there at all. So I'm not really trusting these graphs. Those things don't make me think this is very well done. But anyway, to come to the point, the two that everyone's looking at, this is clearly Pennsylvania. I bet you I didn't have to tell you about that. That annoying rise of that curve is what's annoying all the Republicans and creating this idea that there's fraud going on. And the other one is this, and this is, I think this is Wisconsin, but it could be Michigan. And I think that this is, so if this is Nevada, again, look at that big, long, flat line as though like somehow no counting took place. There's some minor variances there, but I think bugger all counting is going on in here. I think this should be much foreshortened. I imagine there's going to be a lot of activity crammed in there at the end. I don't trust it. But this one here, that is annoying for Trump supporters, and that's what's causing the doubt and this rise of this curve as though it's inexorably overtaking. Let me try and explain away both of these things. If we take a look at Wisconsin and that severe jump, look, it's happened again there. It's not the only time it's happening. So this is Louisiana. Louisiana's got a population of, well, Louisiana brought in 2 million votes, and Wisconsin brought in 3.2 million votes. So they're both big numbers. We are seeing jumps, and that's a jump that favored, I think all these big jumps up are going to favor Democrats because they're going to be cities. There's a bit of a jump up. It's a bit early on. It's, you know, if a thing jumps up later in the piece, it's a bigger jump because 3% of 90% is bigger than 3% of, say, 10%. There's another one. There's another one. There's another one there. So you don't trust the flat line there at all. That's clearly a mistake. Look at that. That must be a mistake there for sure. And the other one I found, let me just move the picture. You reckon those things aren't a mistake? What are they? 1, 2, 3. There's a hell of a jump. Whatever that is. Who's that? Okay, so this is Virginia. I'm going to have a look into that. That's definitely wrong. 1, 2, 3. They must be computer glitches or something like that. As is, I think. Or is it that one there? Whatever that is. But it does happen, unfortunately, for you Trump supporters that the Wisconsin jump up is happening late in the piece. I imagine it's coming across a bigger city or a bigger batch of mail-ins. Now, to come to the Pennsylvania thing, take a look at this graph that I found. Note the difference between a triangle and a square. A triangle is something that says when pre-processing starts or tabulation starts, so basically when counting starts. And the square is when there's a deadline. So there's 3 days between when Pennsylvania starts opening its ballots and counting them and when it can receive the last ballots. There are going to be no people walking in to vote, so that's going to be fewer Trump supporters, and there's going to be only mail-ins during this point in time, which is severely going to advantage Biden. Coming back to what we saw in the graphs, Biden gets a huge advantage when it comes to mail-ins. That's Pennsylvania up there, 300% more likely for a mail-in to be for Biden than for Trump. So all the mail-ins, there's going to be 3 days of mail-ins. And so that's, to me, is always going to make sort of like at the very end of the tail, it's going to go up. Now, if we go back to Pennsylvania is not the only state that has this issue. Iowa, Idaho, North Carolina, Nevada, and Minnesota both have them. Let's take a look at Ohio and Iowa, two other states that I always get mixed up. So for Iowa, there's a 40% advantage to Biden, which is pretty good. And for Ohio, there's a 36% advantage. So that would also seem to state that both those two states have that sort of some days after electoral time when mail-ins can come in. So you can expect to see a flick up. But also, I thought I saw one for Trump. Who was it? It was Minnesota. Minnesota's got it as well. And interestingly, if we come to Minnesota, Trump actually has an advantage with mail-ins in Minnesota. And if we go and take a look at those graphs, Iowa, it does seem to be sort of a flattening of a curve there. You know, it's not flicking up like Pennsylvania did, but Iowa, it does seem to have that effect. Ohio, again, where's that graph? Again, flattening off and even just picking up a little bit at the end. Perhaps when this gets to 100%, we'll see it start to flick up. And Minnesota is the last one I'm looking for. Here again with Trump, flattening and starting to rise. Trump's sort of getting that effect as well. So this Pennsylvania effect doesn't seem to be so bad if you're asking me. It seems to be reasonable. I don't think that it's necessarily indicative of fraud in and of itself. That Biden got 300% like massive amounts of mail-in, that needs explaining. I think it's about time to summarize the major points I want to make here. I'm looking into the Louisiana and I'm looking into Nebraska because of the senator issues. I'm looking into Pennsylvania because just the sheer quantum of votes that Pennsylvania got. They got massive amounts. Michigan got quite a few too, a hell of a lot of mail-ins. And I'm looking into some of those graphs that have big flat lines. I don't think counting is going on there at all. I think they're just going to stuff a whole bunch of I don't trust the denominator, as I'm saying, in those ratios. I just don't think anything's going on there at all. Going forward, I don't know how I feel about just 21 million mail-outs going out to all Californians everywhere, and you can either choose to use the ballot or not. It's going out to dead people, and it's going out to houses where you don't live anymore, just like when you got the mail from the person that used to live to before. That doesn't seem very good. Can't we email them, or can't there be some sort of QR code sort of thing going out in the mail? I don't know. I know you still got to forge your signature, but I don't like it. And in the case where there's a huge batch of, say, 100 or 150,000 errant ballots going out, I wonder how many people are getting those ballots and not voting. I would say in both those situations, though, it was New York and Ohio, right? And then those states aren't really in dispute. I don't think it's going to affect the election. Now, going through this auditor that I made a whole list of little issues that I found. And I'm going to run through them now, little errors that I found. Number one, I want to know why some states haven't counted anything for 5 days, but they're still Maine's been at 91% for ages. Alaska's been at 56% for ages. What's going up in there? That's unusual that something wouldn't be happening. If there's been a directive from a court or something to stop counting, fine, but why aren't people who are supposed to be counting? That's one issue that I want to get to the bottom of if I was auditing this. I was updating my spreadsheet from all the time, from when America was at 50% counted up till now to when it's at 96% counted. And I noted that both Montana and Nebraska's ballot requested number changed by 1% after the counting started. I don't know why a ballot requested number would change. You would know ballots requested before 24 hours before the deadline for the election. That numbers shouldn't have been changing. That's something that I would look into as well. Who's tampering with the numbers at the back, or at least changing the numbers, and why change ballots requested after Election Day? I note that New Hampshire's ballots requested and ballots returned increased by 3,200 after Election Day. Same issue. I note that North Carolina had 9,766 more mail-in ballots posted after Election Day. That would be okay because it does get those few days, but it does make me think that that's a very small number. It's not going to, if they recount this and for some reason those ballots don't get counted, I don't think it's going to change the outcome of the election. For example, when I was looking at Maryland, when I started this morning, Maryland was at 70%, and then it went up to 80%, which is 300,000 votes that came in. Now, they must be mail-in votes because it can't be in-person votes because after the election date. However, the ratios between Republicans and Democrats of mail-in votes didn't change. That 300,000 votes didn't cause a change in mail-in ratios at all. That doesn't seem right to me. That seems something that's probably wrong. I think I saw that Texas went from being 97% complete to 99% complete, and 2% is a lot in Texas, without any votes actually being tallied, so that must have been the denominator changing. People must have updated the assumption of how many people are going to vote. I want to know what the assumptions are behind that. I did note that in some instances, this isn't necessarily wrong, this is probably just something I don't understand, but the expected Senate vote differed from the expected presidential vote. So 99% of the presidential votes had come in, but Senate votes was only at 98%. Why are we expecting different votes to come in for senators than presidents? Are we using a different denominator when we're calculating how many expected votes for senates and for presidents? And if so, why so? This next one could have been a typo on my behalf, but when I was updating my spreadsheet when West Virginia went from 98% to 99%, I note that Trump, I think, lost 50,238 votes and Biden lost 26,691 votes. If that's my mistake, I'm really sorry. There will be historical data that someone else can check into, but that did seem wrong. I don't know how people are losing votes. Maybe a recount or something like that. Georgia seemed to get 2,500 absentee ballots late. So let me just check that absentee. Yeah, Georgia can't receive absentee ballots late, but I did note that Georgia went up by 2,500. Same thing for North Carolina, 3,000. No, North Carolina's allowed to, so that one doesn't seem to be a problem. I've mentioned it already, but the Virginia errors, the ups and downs seems to be glitches. I definitely want to look into that. So on the whole, I mean, I don't see that there's anything going on here that there's necessarily fraud or big errors going along. Just how Pennsylvania got so many more mail-ins than anyone else. But there might be a reason for that. I want to look into the Louisiana-Nebraska Senate thing. Besides that, I mean, it's one of the biggest, most incredible countries in the world, and they're trying to run a very, very difficult election. I see no reason to panic over this at all. I just look into these things and make them public and be as transparent as possible. I think I'll leave it there. I'm going to do a follow-up video and recheck all my numbers again in a month's time or something like that, when it's all calmed down. We've seen the outcome, or at least the numbers are finalized and everyone's had a chance to update all their tables. It's tough for these numbers keep moving and going out live. Anyway, thanks guys. Thanks for listening. Hit like and subscribe, and I'll try and make another video, which probably won't be much like this one soon. Bye now.